Hello, and welcome to the Defenders of the Digital Universe show. Given the rapid changes in the telecommunications sector, cybersecurity challenges, data privacy, many other issues, our special thought leaders will share their insights today. We're going to focus on answering the question, what is the current state of the telecommunications ecosystem regarding cybersecurity, data privacy, and other matters as the globe is adjusting to really working anywhere? Stay tuned to find out more. Well, hi, everybody. I'm your host, Gary Berman. It's so great to have you here. I'm with my co-host, Ron Craig. Say hi, Ron.
Say hi, Ron. Oh, hi, Gary.
Okay, I'll do the comedy. You do cybersecurity. That way we kind of stay, in our lanes.
We'll just start the show like that every single time, and we'll just have this.
For real.
Gonna have fun, right?
I agree. And speaking of having fun, someone asked me recently, where did I learn some of the stuff, that I've learned, because I know a little bit about many things, and so I decided really to show everyone here conferences. So this is the source of my superpower, which I'm sure. It's the same as all of you. Ron, how many conferences have you been to in your career, if you had to guess?
Oh, actually, I've done almost every one virtual. I've actually never gone to any in person, just because even though I've been in the industry, I wasn't actually attending conferences. I was doing everything, pretty much a hands-on type guy, at the office working. So I would say in terms of conferences, I probably have I have 5 maybe. So you have 1 or 2 more than me.
Well, it's funny because people ask, like, why did I do that? And to make a long story short, I was the CEO of a marketing company that was hacked by a series of insiders. Essentially, they cloned my company. I lost everything, had to lay off about 100 people or so. And I realized that just being a victim is, exhausting and unfortunately not particularly unique. And so I decided to learn about cybersecurity to become an advocate. And I bought a book called Cybersecurity for Dummies. Have you ever seen those yellow books, like with the black stripe?
Yeah, and that's really good marketing ploy, and I'd have to call it a ploy because I have yet to see a For Dummies book that hasn't been extremely complex.
Well, okay. Now, and for our audience, this was not planned. 10 pages into a book called Cybersecurity for Dummies, I was lost. So rather than quitting, I found the author, a great guy, the former CISO of Palo Alto Networks, and I told him that, and he cracked up, like almost crying from laughter. So I'm a funny guy. I'm going like, hey, why are you laughing, at a guy who lost everything? He goes, well, it's not really for beginners. I mean, come on.
Yep.
And that's when I realized there had to be a better way to distill complicated tech and cybersecurity information into something else. And saw Spider-Man, light bulb went off, and the Cyber Hero Adventures, Defenders of the Digital Universe, and now here, we're so lucky to be, talking to these incredible people like my good friend. Hey, Charlie, how you doing?
Gary, good afternoon.
Hey, Charlie.
Ron?
So, Charlie, tell us a little bit about your really interesting origin story.
Well, I think my origin story from a cyber perspective is just I've got a lot of concern from small business. Been involved with many small businesses, worked for many small businesses, and recognize that they're not served very well, and stood up and participating with this activity at the American Small Business Development Center to do something about it.
Yeah, and we met
we met last year about this time at RSA. And we were the last people out of San Francisco, right?
Yep. And then we met again at the CMMC conference at MITRE in just outside of Washington.
Right. Supply chain meeting. Mm-hmm.
And that's something you're very involved with, the CMMC. And what's the name of your mission right now?
Well, it's North Star CMM. So it's North Star is the direction, the cybersecurity maturity model is the direction, And we leave the last C off just because we think that the certification is a separate business decision. We need to focus on the model itself. And some companies will need to be certified, and they know they will be, and others will just need to follow a model. So this allows us to take this beyond the original scope of just for the Defense Department. It allows us to take it into all other business sectors.
Indeed, and we'll be talking a little bit further about telecommunications and the unique challenges that the small to medium business market has. And you're probably like the best guy in the country to talk about that. So speaking of unbelievably great people, Keith Fuentes. Hey, Keith.
Hey, Gary. How's it going? Hello, everybody.
Great. It's so good to see you again. And he's with Samsung. Why don't you tell us a little bit about tell everyone how we met.
Sure. So I think it was December 2017 at the Wall Street Journal Pro Cybersecurity Forum. And I was from Samsung was a sponsor. And so I was one of the keynotes. And at the time, our first lineup of speakers, we had a assistant director of the FBI cyber terrorism group. And then we had a CIA chief who did cyber terrorism globally. And they gave a speech about that there's a huge issue happening in the world today, which is the bad actors are working together, collaborating and sharing what they do. But the good actors, or the corporations that are trying to protect themselves, are working in silos. Maybe because it's fear of return on investment or their stock price, but they're not necessarily collaborating or sharing or working like they should. And I think that presentation, they had a specific customer with them on stage who had just been attacked, and they wanted to share that this was not a new attack. It was a repeat offending attack, that this company could have saved itself if corporations had kind of band together. What was interesting was when they finished speaking and asked for questions, you stand up. Now, I had never met you before. And if anybody hasn't met Gary, he's about 6'7". So when he stands up, you will notice. And Gary takes a stand and says, look, I appreciate what you just spoke to. I represent a small business that was hacked, destroyed, employees lost their jobs. And I'm here because I'm pivoting my career to give back, do something different, to educate. And the fact that you didn't understand cybersecurity fully at the time, your goal was to educate, and your goal was to create a forum to help people or corporations to do something, whether they wanted to do it publicly or whether they wanted to do it in the shadows. Either way, you could bring to the forefront in a user-friendly manner a way to fully understand some of these things we're dealing with in corporate society from a security risk, and maybe give them the solution. And I just found that fascinating. So that's when I approached you, and we chatted at the first break. And it was just interesting because when you started to show me how you were being breached and where some of these attacks were coming, which to me, it sounded like a daemon in the network that was hitting you. I spoke to you that at that time, the security I could solve it. So that's how we met. Was really, I found your story fascinating. I agreed with the concept that the FBI and CIA had mentioned the methodology of what we'd have to do to fix this. And then when I heard your story, I thought there was some synergy that we could bring you a solution to get your business started again. And that's kind of how we met.
Yeah, and it worked. And, unbelievably, Keith and one of your chief engineers, came to my house to scrutinize my stuff, to vet my story, because, it's nuts and literally like not believable, but true. So anyways, we'll hear all about the cool stuff you're doing. Regarding storytelling and cybersecurity, to distill complicated, technology and cyber information into something that kind of the rest of the world can get their heads around, and stuff like that. So, and speaking of, really interesting storytelling, hey, Matt, how you doing?
Hey, Gary.
Thanks so much for being here. We met recently. I had the honor of being the master of ceremonies at the Health ISAC conference, and Matt was one of our subject matter experts, and he does a lot of cool stuff over at Cox Communications. So Matt, why don't you share a little bit about your origin story?
Well, I started with Cox Communications almost 20 years ago. I was Cox's first abuse department. If you didn't know, there is a department within an ISP called the Abuse Department. So at one point, I had the best title you could ever have, which was Manager of Abuse. Since then, I've moved on a bit from that job, and I'm now the Senior Principal Security Architect.
And you're also incredibly humble. You have a very interesting background. And that's one of the things I noticed about you, our audience. You are the folks that are really the unsung cyber heroes who kind of toil in anonymity to keep us safe at work or at home and at school. And it became a very important part of my mission to say thank you and to shine the light on all of you. So, Matt, thanks so much for who you are and for what you do. And so everyone,
Alexander.
so everyone say hi to Alexander. How you doing, Alexander?
Hey, Gary. Hi, everyone.
Alexander and I met through this really cool high-level risk management networking platform called RANE, R-A-N-E. And it's about 7,000 very senior professionals around the world in risk management. And that's something I learned just from listening and learning that cybersecurity, certainly would sort of fall under that overall, umbrella. So, Alexander, maybe you can share with our audience a little bit about your mission and, a little bit about your origin story.
Sure. My passion in life is to democratize cyber. And I think we all kind of share that just in listening to everyone else's origin story. Instead of calling it cybersecurity, I work for an organization, a risk intelligence firm out of Chicago, as the managing director of cyber. And so we really distill it down to the concept of cyber being a culture of information technology and systems that are used to help us make decisions. And that really comes back from all the way back to when I went to the Air Force Academy. In 1997, I went to the Air Force Academy and almost failed out my first year because I had no idea how to use a computer. I mean, you're talking, I show up for the first day of class, and the teachers are all looking at all my other fellow freshman cadets and they're saying, turn in your homework. Everyone's turning in homework, and I have no idea what she was talking about. But I had never hooked up email, never used email, never opened attachments, never attached attachments. And so I was already behind on day one at the Air Force Academy. But in learning how to use systems and really kind of teaching myself and taking extra instruction from instructors, that's where I started to understand that computers are not as difficult as we make them out to be. And then information security kind of followed the same lead of that lexicon. So really democratizing the vocabulary and lexicon of cybersecurity. After the Air Force Academy, I actually went into the Army. I graduated in May of 2001, several months before September 11th.
Wait a minute. You were top of your class.
Yeah, so I was an honorable graduate from the Air Force Academy, and funny enough, I actually switched to the Army. So there's a whole other story there. I get a hard time from a lot of my peers and alumni classmates, but I graduated in May of 2001, several months before September 11th, and I was not a pilot. So I tried to do everything I could to really contribute in a patriot capacity for the country. And I wound up actually doing a lot of stuff on the ground as a special operations officer in the Army. That's really where I found my true passion for cyber, because we were using Wi-Fi data to see if we could predict where the enemy was going to attack. So I was using bandwidth information, metrics on log data to keep my teams protected and to keep my, to make sure I never had to deliver a letter to anyone's family. So that kind of turned into my cyber, and that's why I love the platform you built, Gary, the concept of cyber heroes. Everyone in my professional and personal opinion is a cyber hero because we live in a digital age. Everyone's transacting data on a day-to-day basis, on a minute-to-minute, second-to-second basis. And so they just haven't discovered their superpowers yet, or they're not willing to, they don't want to discover their superpowers because you'll realize exactly how much responsibility you'll have. So that's my mission in life, democratizing cyber, bringing it to the most basic level. I think we're all in it for the same mission, but making it a lot simpler because it is very simple. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, not at all. Thanks for your service. And a couple of you were also in the service. Keith, weren't you in the service?
No, I didn't do military service. I know I didn't give my origin story, but my whole focus growing up, I grew up in a family of law enforcement, many officers, agents in my family, and I had a love for trying to have a career that was kind of invoking your physical, mental, and spiritual skill set. So I sought after, since I was 6 years old, this dream of I want to be an FBI agent. And when I started to go through college, it started to pivot to I really want to look at cyber. And that was just starting to happen in a way that it got interesting to me during my college years. So I took a career in accounting to become a CPA or to do public accounting so that I could get into the FBI quicker, because accountants can go and join the bureau within 2 years experience versus other vocations that are 3. And I ended up moving to California and living in the Silicon Valley area and really falling in love with tech. So it took me a little longer before I applied to the FBI because I started getting those golden handcuffs of seeing an income that was pretty decent when you're working in the cyber world. But I did in my 30s apply to the Bureau, and I would have guessed maybe a few months from maybe going to Quantico. You have to go through phases, and I passed all my phases. The last one was a PFT, a fit test. And during that test, I severely injured my back. And so at that point, my FBI career came to an end, but my cyber career continued on. And so up to that point, I had a lot of experience in the tech world. And coming from a accounting background, if you think about it, most crimes aren't solved based on, say, murder or hack. It's going to be the paper trail. It's going to be the money trail. And so having an accounting background is a great foundation in anything you want to do, let alone cyber. And so I kind of pivoted my career to stick to more to the cyber end. And so today I work for Samsung. I run our customer success team for our mobile B2B sales. I've been here for almost 8 years. Prior to that, I worked with several different startup companies over the course of about 12 years where we created specific software security solutions. And I would say what I do now is I love storytelling. I love telling real life scenarios that will make complex technical issues easier to understand.
Well, forgive the interruption, but what a cool story. We're going to show a little clip of the way that Alex, you're talking about democratization and storytelling. Take a look at this.
Hi, I'm Keith Fuentes, and I'm here to talk about security and how it can help you unlock the true potential of your mobile devices. Think of security like the brakes on your car. They're there to stop your vehicle, offering you safety, protection, and confidence. But when the first cars were created and their brakes were unreliable, you could really only go so fast. But in today's vehicles, the brakes are so much more sophisticated and reliable. And it's because of that reliability that you can actually go faster and go places you've never gone before. The brakes are there when you need them, and that gives you freedom to enjoy the journey. Samsung's Knox Security offers you that same confidence and freedom. Knox is a multi-layered platform built into Samsung devices that delivers security right out of the box from the chip up. It is designed in various layers across both hardware and software, so the device can constantly ensure data is secure anywhere, anytime. With Samsung Knox in place as the device's security solution, along with our biometric scanning capabilities, users can do more faster with their favorite applications like Samsung Pay, Samsung Pass, and Samsung Dex. And that foundational security enables Samsung devices to remain reliable in different environments like government, finance, healthcare, public safety, and more. In short, Samsung's Knox Security is like the brakes on your car. It allows you to do more with your device faster. Learn more at samsung.com/Knox.
Wow, that was super cool. And by the way, Samsung is not a sponsor of the show. I just thought it was a cool animation, and yeah, and you did do a good job in simplifying things. So, Matt, let me turn to you now for a minute, because so now there we have, an end user device. We have some kind of mobile phone that has, various levels of protection, but it has to connect to somewhere, right? So tell us about your world, in the from Cox Communications, ISP, and how's all that going?
Well, that has evolved a lot over the years. Protecting devices is actually one of the things I started out in.
Oh.
The ISP's abuse department is there to enforce the acceptable use policy. So if you weren't aware, every ISP has a mailbox called abuse at whatever their domain is. And the mailbox is there so that people all around the world can report things like malware infections or spamming or DOS attacks or anything else that our customers are doing to violate our acceptable use terms. Back when I first started this in the early 2000s, when someone would get a complaint against them, it was typically because they were doing it on purpose. Like we would get a complaint about spam and we would find that someone was sending out spam for their business. But that has changed so much over the years. These days, when someone's sending out spam, they're not doing it on purpose. They have some kind of malware that's on their computer or increasingly on their tablet or their phone or something like that. And so we actually went so far as to rename the department from the abuse department to the customer safety department. Because now when our customers are violating the terms of service, often they're just victims themselves. And that's only gotten worse over the years as we've moved into this world of the Internet of Things. We have just dozens of devices in everyone's house connected to the internet. And the company who makes your refrigerator or your toaster or your microwave or whatever else and needs it to be connected to the internet for some reason, they don't have any experience typically with cybersecurity. So we see people entering the market with these devices and making really basic mistakes that other people made 20 years ago. And as a result, we have a lot of devices out there that are kind of running rampant. The other thing that's really been an issue with cybersecurity and IoT is that these devices are practically immortal. You know, there are a lot of them that don't have any moving parts. And we find that they outlive even the companies that created them. So even if you had a company that was responsible about patching and vulnerability notifications and all that kind of stuff, you could very easily end up with a device that's just sort of orphaned. It's stuck out on the internet and there's no way to fix it.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting. And speaking of interesting, Charlie, you're doing some incredible work amongst a group that to me seems, in some respects like a sitting duck, the small to medium business market. Maybe you can share with our audience what that's all about, what your mission is, and how's it going?
Well, for the past year, what I've been doing has been out listening to small businesses, listening to industry and government, and trying to figure out a way to give voice to illuminate, I guess, to small businesses to understand the threat, this complex threat that's against them, and help them understand what their responsibilities are, and to give them a pathway that they can understand so they can start taking action. So we've done a lot of testing over the last year with messaging, different approaches in discussions with small businesses. And what we came up with is we've decided that we needed to have a common way or a common direction to take them in. We're noticing that other government agencies weren't really providing a direction. They were providing all kinds of solutions and point solutions, advice, but no one was providing a direction. When the Defense Department came out last January with the cybersecurity maturity model, we decided that we would grab onto that because we could use that for a purpose of protecting confidential information. So when I talk about cyber, I usually don't talk too much about cyber. I talk about protecting confidential information, and cyber is part of confidential information. We also have the written word, right, and that paper in our office, and we have verbal communications that are all part of things that we need to protect. And that protect confidential information. That's confidential information of our own, our employees, anybody in our business ecosystem, and we need to do that to protect our nation. So the great thing about the cybersecurity maturity model, the Defense Department calls it the cybersecurity maturity model certification. We drop off the last C because we think that certification is a separate business decision. We want our clients and small businesses, which we touch 1.5 million every year, we want them to focus on the model so that we have some level of continuity across our 1,000 locations, and we have 4,000 business advisors that give free advice to small businesses, and we're supported by the Small Business Administration and the college universities that host us, or economic development centers in states or state governments, they support us. So what we did was we branded that. We branded our approach as North Star CMM, so that we look at this as a direction. We recognize that there's many different voices or different needs from different sectors. Small businesses are coming at this from all kinds of ways. They have different capabilities, capacities. They have different types of information that they're sharing, different business partners, different architectures. So we couldn't just say this is the way to do it. We could say this is a path. So it's the North Star. And the CMM, the cybersecurity maturity model, is flexible, so that really doesn't get into how that we're doing it. So anyone taking advantage of the little video that we were listening to earlier could map that directly to how they're protecting information, map that to the controls or the processes associated with the cybersecurity maturity model itself. Now, tying this to the telecommunication industry, you're going to hear in the middle of next month about our partnership with US Telecom. US Telecom is very interested in protecting small businesses and helping small and mid-sized businesses, and particularly ones that are in the critical infrastructure sector. So our partnership with them is really going to focus on getting this message to small businesses and other. The beautiful part about it, it allows organizations that want to come in and help, internal resources and external resources, to align their business value to that model, so that when these small businesses go to talk with companies that are coming in to help, they're talking about it from their knowledge of the model's perspective, and the third parties or the internal resources align their whatever they're doing to that model, so that the client can understand what they're inheriting by using their products or services.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting. With that kind of in mind, let me turn it over to my co-host Ron, who's going to have some really super cool questions. And if we're lucky, we might get some breaking news after he's done, but I'll hold on to it.
Oh man.
Well, I don't know how breaking it's going to be, but we'll see. But so I put out a little feeler here to the audience to see if we get some questions coming in. So I'm still waiting for those to come in. But I had a question of my own in terms of the communication and really, and of course this is really open to everybody on the floor, panel, screen, is. The ability to communicate, what we're trying to do to an audience who can understand us. One thing that I always like to say, I've been saying for years, is, nerd speak and taking, geek speak in terms of trying to communicate that, especially to the C-levels and to the boards, and really having them take, how do you get somebody to take action if they don't know what the heck you're talking about? And I think, that's always been a challenge of ours in the industry. So I'd like to see, what your take is on how do we improve the communications itself to reach the people that really are the decision makers in the organization and the companies, to make sure that first of all, they understand it and they know how to act.
I'd say they have to understand what the purpose of all this activity is and have a direction. It gets really confusing. As I was saying earlier, there's all kinds of voices coming at all kinds of businesses. So lawyers, there's the accountants, there's managed service providers, there's the government. Everybody's coming at these people with all kinds of voices. And from our experience, that we really need to distill those voices into providing a direction that isn't prescriptive, that doesn't force somebody to do something in certain ways. That that like our North Star provides that direction, or the cybersecurity maturity model provides that direction. That's helpful. So you're getting people on the same track while they're communicating. So when stakeholders in an organization, they get the idea that they need to protect confidential information, they need to really understand what it really is and the implications of that are against their organization. So when the third parties or the internal resources are talking to them, they have a model that they can bounce those thoughts off, and they don't have different people coming at them and from different approaches, that they have a common approach. That's our opinion anyway.
Cool.
To add to that, I think it's about awareness, right? Like the key to threat management and risk intelligence right now is about awareness. If your employees and your team members don't recognize that there's a threat to their system or their data, then they're not going to continue. They're not going to change any of their behavior in the way that they manage their data. When I look at cyber, sensitive data rarely travels alone. Right, you're not going to find an SSN sitting on an Excel spreadsheet by itself. It's going to have a name. It's going to be connected to a file name. It's going to be in a folder. So, like when you route that all the way through, very similar to the video that Keith had, everything there's a log to all the business processes that happen in a device. And so, if we can decomplicate that, simplify that, it makes it easier for people to want to digest and become aware that they are a sensor for the organization. The other thing, one of the very effective techniques that I like to use when I'm dealing with enterprise clients is, I relate it back to their board meeting notes. So I look up their SEC filings, like their 10K and their 10Q, which are their annual and quarterly reports, and I find exactly what they're identifying as their risk factors. It could be GDPR, it could be this other compliance. And what I loved about what Charlie was saying is, we live in an age of hyper compliance when it comes to technology and frameworks and models and solutions and standards and this and that and different voices. It's almost schizophrenic what a decision maker in an organization has to do. And so if you whittle away, strip away all that extra technology and in battle, like strip away all the armor and extra bullets and extra weapons and to say, what do I need to do to accomplish my mission? What is my mission? It gets very, very easy to, again, not to keep giving you a virtual high fives, Charlie, but small to medium-sized businesses don't need a chief information security officer, right? They just need to have someone that's chief information security aware, right? And so, they can't afford it. Some enterprises have chief information security officers, but they're siloed out from their CIO or their data officers, so they're not even talking. And essentially, it all comes back down to the linchpin of connecting it all at really a heart or atrium of awareness, right? Like if your bottom line user understands that the data that's in their system is sensitive, that's step one. Past that, now they can be a superhero because they can recognize that there are villains out there trying to get at my computer, even though I just got hired yesterday. So that's kind of how I look at awareness. Breeds information. Information can create intelligence, and when you're intelligent, you can make decisions to protect your company and your team.
Yeah,
Being able to communicate those concepts effectively and simply is just so critical to cybersecurity.
Yeah.
I find that there are a lot of people who don't need to be convinced there's a problem. They don't need to be convinced that something needs to be done, but they don't know what to do. Particularly when we're talking about lawmakers, when we're talking about regulators, there's a lot of people whose hearts are in the right place and they're gung-ho to fix some problems, but they don't have the knowledge that they need. And that can either lead to inaction or in some cases making bad decisions. So one of the things I've really dedicated myself to is educating people, being able to speak to both the very technical people and like the policymakers. And it works. We saw this, for example, with Executive Order 13800. It was an executive order from the president on protecting federal networks from botnets. And so the Department of Commerce and the National Institute of Standards and Technology brought private industry together with government, and we had workshops. We talked things through, and we were able to develop a really realistic picture of here's what the state of things are. We were able to clear up some misconceptions about what really effective controls would be in combating botnets. And what we got out of it a couple years later is some really good IoT cybersecurity legislation. It was just passed a couple of months ago. The legislation is good, we think, because it references back to a set of NIST standards. So the first thing is that it doesn't say, well, your IoT device needs to not have default logins, or it needs to patch, or there's no specific recommendations in there, because those recommendations can change from day to day as new exploits come out, and getting a law changed quickly just doesn't happen. So instead, this piece of legislation just responds, or it points back to a NIST set of standards that can evolve, that can be a living document. Also, what the bill does is it restricts federal spending. So rather than saying manufacturers, you will do this, and manufacturers, you won't do this, it says, here's a set of standards, follow them or don't, but if you don't follow them, you will not have access to the billions of dollars that the federal government has to spend. So we thought that was a really good approach and a really good result.
That's awesome. Kind of going further to that point is one thing that I posed this question about actually about a year and a half ago, and it was kind of interesting. It was a question that I actually posed to Gary Vaynerchuk, which he actually believed. Strangely enough, he actually responded to me with a video reply on LinkedIn, and I asked him. I said, how are we going to get everybody to really take cybersecurity seriously, especially in the area of marketing and really getting people to see it? And one of the things that he brought up from his perspective, which is good because it's completely outside of our realm, it's a completely different point of view, was that everything is so muted. There's so much fear and FUD and anxiety and everything around. And of course, we see that today, the fact that, from a year and a half ago, a year ago to today, it's like night and day in terms of what's actually going on. So that fear is just continually to raise. Now, of course, our job is to look past that, to push past that, to get everybody understanding that it's even more important, but we have to do that without using so much fear to make that happen. So what are your thoughts on the level of anxiety and fear and people really not wanting to see and understand because they've had enough? You know, it's just too scary. It's too big of a demon to beat and fight. So how do we really continue?
Yeah, Ron, I agree with exactly this comment. I've been selling software security for 20 years now, maybe 19 and a half. And when it's sold as a security play, you shut off half the room the moment you mention the word security, because there is this fear and anxiety. And even though people may be paranoid, a lot of times people won't protect against the bark until they've been bit. And then it's sometimes too late. So what I try to do, and I think that video you saw earlier was an attempt at, is to take the security word itself and change it from a fear insurance sales into a business betterment, and to really explain the fact that you should embrace security. It's because of the security that's going to allow your business to take that next step. And I think the biggest thing that's happened in the last 10 years, if you were to go back in a previous role I had at a company, when I would meet with high-level executives, they would test products and solutions, especially software, over an exorbitant amount of time. It was like analysis paralysis, but they wouldn't make a lot of purchases because they had to have the most perfect solution chosen and implemented, or they thought they would lose their job. But I will tell you, in the last 5-6 years, that's paradigm has shifted. Yep. You don't get fired for the product you implemented poorly. You get fired for the product you didn't implement, your competitor did implement, and they took that next step. Like the largest transportation company of human bodies is a company that didn't even own a car. When Uber came out and created this app, they stole the market because they embraced trying something different, something new. Now, why I mention this story is security should be the enabler, that if you take your security posture seriously and you think of it as the betterment, to allow you to do some more of these projects. Yeah. And then the final analogy I get, I've met a few self-made billionaires that have spoken at events. And when I go up and talk to them, there's one common theme. They lose more than they win. They had mistake after mistake, but the one win was so big, they made $1 billion, and everybody thinks they're geniuses. But you can strike out, but if you hit the grand slam at the right time, you can still win the game. So it's one of those things where I think you got to start taking these more risks and going out and trying new projects. And if your security is at front and taken serious, you can do those things. And so I try not to make it a security play, an insurance sale. It's really more about a business enablement. And to do that, there's a very specific methodologies you can use. Like, I think it was 2010, this Forrester analyst, John, came out with zero trust. Right. And that was an example of how trust nothing. That could be a good posture to start with, and I agree with it. But then after you verify and you can remove some of the risk, then you start to accept. And so I think there are methodologies out there. I think there's companies willing to help. For me, I think the first thing that has to happen is pull the security part out and really focus on the business enablement because of the foundation of security. I think that really changed mine.
Yeah, I'm glad you put it that way. There's one of the ways that we're looking at when we talk with small business, trying to get this, what we call the friction out of this, right? All the friction out of this whole process is that we talk about a business at the business level. Our 4,000 people talk about business. We're not cyber people, we're business people. And so when we talk to them, we say, you know, you've got generally accepted accounting principles. If your business is going to grow, you have to follow generally accepted accounting principles, or you'll be very lucky maybe, but you will not grow. You'll have no ability to grow and sustain that growth. So when we take a look at cybersecurity or data protection from a broader perspective, that we need to have principles in place. We need to have generally accepted cyber and data protection principles in place. That's how we're labeling the cybersecurity maturity model in that way, so that people understand that in those terms. And to the point of getting information to them, I think a lot of people just get overwhelmed. Like, how many times a couple of years ago did people say something about Target? Oh my God, the whole world's coming to an end. And the reality is, what am I going to do about this? So they have to understand that the messaging has to be specific to them. What in your world and the way that you're doing business, what do you need to do to protect things? And that information, in my mind, needs to be short, sharp, get to the point, so that they can listen to a 2.5 minute video here, 2.5 minute video there. So that eventually this just gets into their brain in the way that they behave, because behavior is really important, right? And so the FTC, if you look at the FTC videos right now, they're 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So I can reasonably assume they've taken out all the logos and the stuff and the people in the suits out of the front end and the back end, and they just put the information in. I can reasonably assume I can push that to somebody to people in my organization, and they can look at it, and they may get interrupted by a text in the middle of it, but I can reasonably assume that they'll go 2 minutes and 20 seconds to get that information. I can't assume it if it's over 5 minutes, because I don't know where, and even in this broadcast, there's people coming in and out of this, right? So
well, you bring up
right to the point, right?
Forgive the interruption. You're bringing up an incredibly important, point about distilling complicated technology information into something that people can get their heads around and deliver it the way they want. For this show, for example, I'm really honored to have about 22,000 followers. The show we did last week was with the former head of the Presidential Protective Services Division for the U.S. Secret Service, who was responsible for forensics and technology and stuff. And so we had about maybe 15 or 20 people on live. Then it's gotten like 900 views, on demand, because people want to consume this. It's like Netflix, on demand. Alex, I wanted to come back to you just for a second, because it was mentioned earlier. A really interesting thought about risk, and for our audience, can you just provide an overview of risk management and how cybersecurity fits, within in a typical organization?
Absolutely. So, the thing that I think everyone has heard is we don't know what we don't know, right? And so, kind of tying it all into risk management and what my colleagues Charlie and Keith have said, it's all about cybertelling, education, awareness, and then figuring out different flavors to introduce that, so it's not over education, over awareness, and over training, right? And so a lot of it, awareness and training is about knowing who the enemy is. And so to evoke, my military background, there's a digital battlefield that we're always involved in, right? It doesn't have to be virtual reality. And the key that's changed everything in terms of risk is that data is an asset. It's no longer a liability. So when we talk about fear, it's because we've always held so tight onto to data that we're breaking it, right? And we're spending all this money to hold onto it. But think about it like this. No one robs a bank vault that doesn't have any money in it, right? And so if you're looking at where the data is at, and you've identified the data and you've prioritized the data, then you can start to mitigate the risk on your most sensitive data. So have you taken the time to say, well, beyond just saying, I don't know what I don't know, well, now it's not enough. You have to try to figure out what you don't know. And there's a lot that a lot of people don't know. And the biggest thing with risk management as well is that everyone in cyber is an expert, and no one's an expert at the same time. And so what you have to do is continue to take time to step back, take a tactical pause, evaluate where you're at in the battlefield, evaluate what weapons you have, how many bullets you have, what data you have, if you have enough to continue the mission or not, or if you need to dogleg and reconvene and consolidate, reorganize. Where I see the biggest mistakes, I serve as a VC sort of organizations. I'm very, very lucky to be able to select my customers and my clients, because I don't work with organizations that don't specifically save my data as an asset. And so to the earlier state, or the earlier question of marketing, let's just walk through a risk scenario there. You actually have a significant asset that you can leverage for business development in a marketing sense. There are very few companies that are trying to use privacy as a weapon for their business. I mean, I just read a report that says 62% of Americans prefer stronger privacy protections over easier access to their health and medical records. That's an entire market that you could immediately market to if you can show how strong your privacy standards are. And so are you even looking at how your customer market is discussing risk and privacy, and have you integrate that into the DNA of your business? Again, small businesses have a very difficult time to do that, unless that's how you start, and your CEO or chief intelligence or chief decision makers actually incorporated that. But again, to your point directly, Gary, and to your question directly, take time to actually figure out, you can't mitigate 100% of your risk. My job as a consultant and as a vCISO, as a CISO, as a chief data officer, as a special operations officer is to say, what can I do to show that I'm not being negligent to pay attention to the data that I have to protect? What do I do to make sure that my guys, my gals on my team are protected as much as possible in terms of mission planning and controls and risk? And so are you looking at all of your data and trying to protect every single data element? Or are you protecting the top 10% that would survive your business, that would protect your team, that would protect your customers? And then what are the gaps inside of your portfolio? The great thing about frameworks is that there's a lot of them. The bad thing about frameworks is that there's a lot of them, right? So you have to figure out which framework applies to the top critical assets of your organization, which framework applies to the people, the psychology and the philosophy of your people, and then what technologies do you have that can make that framework work? So people, process, and technology, and then also community, right? Everyone always says people, process, technology, but they rarely ever think about the community too. I can't remember who said it earlier, but in terms of cyber, we've looked at it in terms, like all the bad guys are working together. They're a community of practice. The good guys are siloed, right? And so are you including your peers? One of the most kind of disappointing things I hear quite often is, well, what are other CISOs doing? What are other CIOs doing? I'm like, well, I don't know. Why don't you call them and ask them? Because you guys are in the same fight together, and whatever they're doing would help you survive the battlefield just like them. So that's how I look at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, forgive the interruption, Alex. That's awesome. One of the unbelievably cool things that through my sort of Forrest Gump journey into cybersecurity has afforded me is to work with the ISACs, information sharing and analysis centers, for exactly the same reason you just pointed out, which is the criminals are horizontal. They share everything. There's a Yelp system for did you deliver properly on your cocaine? Right. But the good guys are all vertically structured. There are reasons for that. There are legal constraints. There's intellectual property stuff. People sell their stuff. So there are structural reasons. But the ISACs, I think, are the secret sauce. To all of them. Anyone, Matt? What do you think about information sharing and analysis centers, and how does Cox Communications sort of fit into that? Because it seems to me, they would you have an incredible data stream.
Yeah, absolutely. As recent events with the SolarWinds hack have pointed out, we are all in this together. We have gone beyond a model where finger pointing makes any sense. The old model is that a company gets breached and the government comes knocking on your door and says, "Why did you get breached? Here, have a big fine." And that just doesn't make any sense anymore. I went to the Department of Homeland Security's National Cybersecurity Summit 3 years ago, and the CEO of MasterCard was speaking there. And he said something that has stuck with me for all these years. He said, if a private shipping company had one of their ships torpedoed by a foreign military submarine, that company would not be hauled in front of Congress to testify about why the hull of their ship was not thicker, right? That is a military attack against a civilian target. So why is it that we treat cybersecurity differently? Why is it that when a large corporation in the United States is breached by a foreign military, they are testifying to Congress about why their defenses weren't better? So we need a different paradigm. We need more information sharing. To take that analogy a little further, the government should have told that shipping company where the submarine was. Maybe the government should have defended against that submarine itself. If there's a Russian bomber flying over my data center, I shouldn't be expected to build a jet fighter to go get after it, right? So we need more partnership and less finger pointing.
And that's an incredibly astute analysis. And coincidentally, I'm working with some folks at the Department of Homeland Security and CISA and things like that. They in the new budget that will be approved, I think there was something like $10 billion for cybersecurity. Anybody heard that?
I think there's going to be some serious changes coming, not just because of recent events, but because of the report from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Thinking about this differently. So we don't all just need to be holed up in our little castles trying to protect ourselves from outside threats. We need changes at a government policy level. So when a foreign military attacks a civilian target, what should the government response be to that? Should it be to strike back in some way? Should it be sanctions or something like that? Should it be diplomacy? I think we have a need for maybe like a cyber diplomatic corps. Maybe the answer is a truce. Maybe it's a ceasefire. Maybe it's a treaty. We just need to think broader about how we deal with this.
I think as long as you have the attribution to even know who to look at, which we know is extremely difficult in our field, and even especially with groups that may actually have military or APT backing from nation state, these they're pretty good. They have the ability to not just cover their tracks, but to put them somewhere else. And so it's a very, very difficult time.
If I could add something, I think what we were always circling around in this conversation is the education part. That's why I think, Gary, I was so drawn to your story. Is it's the education that's usually lacking. Either it's not in a forum people are comfortable with, or it's not readily available, or it's not updated to the latest. But I think when I look at these cyber attacks and I think about them, sure, we're worried about enemy states. Sure, we're worried about maybe our competitor. But then we always overlook what I think is the biggest threat, and I think Snowden proved it, which is internal. And sometimes internal is by accident. It's not that they're a vicious employee. It's just that they weren't educated. They didn't think it was a bad thing. And they just clicked on the wrong spam mail or whatever it might be. So I feel like when I look at security, it's kind of like peeling back layers of the onion, depending on the customer. So for example, if I'm talking to Charlie in a small, medium business, I know they probably don't care about enemy state right now. They're not looking maybe at spear phishing. They're looking at something that could just be one bad mistake made by an employee that could be so catastrophic they can't recover. So to the LinkedIn question about how you show that value or return on investment, I think you really have to look at first what you're dealing with, kind of peel that onion back to what is the layer that's pertinent to you. Find out, I think it was excellent, Alex talked about the data. What is the data or thing you're worried about? Is it a secret recipe? Is it a formula? Is it something that's specific to your company's industry that you can't let go? And then what's the value of that? And then I think it would help you to start putting in policy. And then the final piece I'll say, and something I learned being here at Samsung especially, you have to keep it simple. If it's too complex, people won't follow it and they'll circumvent it, and those end user errors will occur more. So you have to keep something that's simple and adopted, and that makes it a little more tricky. So the final piece is analysis, review. You'll never be perfect, and be willing to adjust and fix, but go in wanting your eyes wide open to know where you can mitigate that risk, and not go in burying your head in the sand saying, I'll wait until I'm bit and then I'll protect. That's kind of the philosophies you have to invoke. I know that's a lot, but and for small, medium business, for Charlie's perspective, it's really difficult.
Yeah. So my byline is keep it simple. We can complicate it later if necessary, right? So I just wanted to bring up another point here. I was on a couple presidential directed working groups, a PPD 21 working groups, and I was a charter member of one that was trying to figure out how to put all this into contracts. So when you talk about my origin story and how we got to the CMM, I was ahead of the cybersecurity maturity model. I was involved with the government trying to figure out, this is really nice how we're going to do this, but how are we going to put this in contract language? It's not only a government problem, it's a large business problem. How am I going to put things like this in our contract with the companies that are trying to help us, the people that we're partnering with, and all this stuff. So as we talk about I'm a small business, and all of a sudden I see all these standards, and this industry has me to do this industry has to do this. The cross mapping of these standards is really important, so that we're actually partnered with we asked the Small Business Administration to assess a GRC tool that does a lot of that automation to make it easier for small businesses. They just got their FedRAMP authority to operate, we felt that it's also necessary to protect that information when you're doing assessments, which is one of the reasons why we asked the Small Business Administration to do that. We find it really fascinating. One of the main reasons why I'm here is that I noticed a couple of years ago when I looked at this organization, we had 4,000 people with 5,000 opinions on how we're going to do stuff with cyber. They were all out there doing these minor cyber assessments, and I'm asking, well, I'll just say there was one senior person at a very high level, at a high level in the telecommunication industry, who was responsible for doing reviews of companies. And I asked him where they kept the information. And he had his laptop with him. He pointed to his laptop. I said, "That's a great place. How are you securing that?" But the point is that we really need to secure this information as well. The importance of cross mapping to make that easier for companies to do that, but also there's so many companies running around there with spreadsheets. I can go up to a government website right now that brings an assessment tool down that's at a very high level. I won't name the agency. You download their assessment tool and you save the information to your computer. They don't even have any guidance on how to protect it. They don't even say encrypt it. They don't say put it in an archive or some safe position. There it is. No, I'm more vulnerable. As a small business, we need to understand that we need to have that discipline associated with that stuff, because those actors are going to find it a lot easier for them to get at our security plans and things if we don't protect those things. Big businesses put those in they have mature ways of protecting that, encrypting that. A lot of small businesses aren't thinking about that way. So small businesses need to protect any information associated with any type of a business assessment. This is a business thing. It could be a continuity of operations plan. It could be their plan for their intellectual to promote their intellectual property or anything. Any of that intellectual property and assessment information is intellectual property, needs to be protected. So that's one of the things that we're really concerned about, protecting that and figuring out ways that when we're working with other people and understand the contract language that we have to satisfy to do business with them.
Yeah, I think, to add to that,
because criminals are targeting that information so much.
Yep.
You look at how ransomware has evolved over the past few years. Ransomware started out as, hey, I have this botnet and I'm going to just blast out ransomware to everything that's infected, and I'm going to try and get $200 out of mom and pop and see if they can figure out how to buy Bitcoin. Now, it is all about the critical information. There are groups of hackers who are essentially red teams who are targeting specific organizations, breaking in, establishing persistence, staying in that network to find all that data that you're talking about, the important data. And then they're not just encrypting it and telling you, well, you have to pay us to get your data back. They're saying, you have to pay us or we're going to release this information to the public. We're going to contact all your partners. We're going to contact your regulators. We're going to contact everybody. We're going to dox you. And so a data-centric approach is just more and more important.
I completely agree. And just to add, cybersecurity is a business identity issue. In my personal and professional opinion, a lot of organizations, they're schizophrenic based on departments. And so, I give you a great example of how the human resources component of a use case scenario became a cybersecurity issue. I worked with a big 4 consulting firm out of London, and essentially they couldn't figure out why cybersecurity was important. And it whittled all the way down to the fact that they had an attrition rate of high, the senior level managers they were hiring from the diversity initiative. Because they weren't feeling included, they would leave the organization after 8 months and take all of their documentation with them. And so that's actually a data privacy and information security issue, because now we're talking intellectual property. Forget the compliance, forget the ransomware and the botnet attacks. That's something that you immediately can prevent because of the way you have your HR recruiting and retention policies. And so these are the conversations, and I'm trying to relate it back to a couple of questions that popped up, with where we're at now. It was very easy to provide a network security layer at the headquarters. Flagpole security is the way lots of organizations were operating. And so you've got the cover of the umbrella of the network security team. But now everyone is forward deployed as a fire base, right? So my house is a fire base. Keith's house is a combat outpost. And so do all of these combat outposts have castle style security? Hell no, right? Excuse my language, but that's really where the risk is at, is you now have 15 castles with only one castle with appropriate security, right? And so is that a business identity conversation you're having? Do I need to provide it? I have a family office that I'm working with right now. They've deployed full modular units to each employee's house. Now, not every organization can do that, right? You're talking scanner, printer, laptop, desktop, phone. What do you need to do in the absence of a process like that? And are you evaluating your most sensitive data with respect to what could affect your company? The last question that came in from the LinkedIn user is the ROI turns back to business decisions that affect finance,
Yep.
right? So that's the first place I start when we do a consult or we do a data map is what data elements, if compromised, would absolutely sink the business. And Gary, this would be the first conversation I want to have with you outside because I really want to whittle through your use case. But if it's, can you survive? What's catastrophic and what's survivable? And have you had that conversation? Because then you'll start to figure out which elements stick on what side of the parking lot. And you really need to know what parking lot to protect, right? And so I'm not going to protect all the assets that if they're already compromised because people are giving them away for free on LinkedIn. Like I've got my resume posted, so all of my professional information is public data now. But the intellectual property on how my organization delivers cyber consulting or how we've created a compliance model that maps all the different controls, that is our bread and butter to the way we're successful with our customers. So again, cybersecurity for me is a business identity conversation in order to determine what the return on investment would be to protect data as an asset, not a liability.
Hey, Alex, I think just a real quick point. Do I have information of my other people in my business ecosystem? If I do, why do I have it? Do I have to have it? And don't, like my son works for a company that does a lot of things with healthcare information. And they have a tool that they see anything that looks like a social security number in emails or any kind of communication, it just blocks it, doesn't allow it into their network at all. Right. So we don't need that information. So don't hold on to information that you don't need. It's not only your own information, it's other people's information. If other people lose that information, their lawyers are going to be knocking on your door. So
data hoarding, right? Data pack ratting. Very dangerous.
Gentlemen, we could just, continue forever. I mean, my head is going to explode. This is so incredibly interesting, and you all each have incredibly unique but complementary perspectives. One of my sort of theses, going into this live, sort of ecosystem is to be a platform for business development and like real life networking. So for me, it seems to me like, Charlie, you should be, talking to Alex and Keith from Samsung. Matt, you should be involved in this, as well. So I hope you guys all connect. And if we'll Ron, if you'd be kind enough maybe to see if there's a way to insert their contact information, into this. I'm not really sure exactly, how to do that. So maybe if you can do that, that would be great. Or we'll post it, to a LinkedIn. And one of the things, that's been incredibly interesting is in my sort of Forrest Gump journey, into this stuff. When I first started, I invited CSOs to connect with me to provide real life stories of cybercrime, answering the questions, what happened? What were the consequences? What were the lessons learned for possible inclusion, into comics? And then I invited other kinds of people. And someone the other day asked me, well, like, who is your audience? I don't know. I mean, and so someone did a little data analysis for me. And these are the folks that you're talking to right now. A lot of them, about 22,000, they're all cyber something or other, which is really, pretty incredible and was, surprising to me, that's for sure. With that in mind, if there's anyone out there who maybe wants to sponsor our show, it's not something I was thinking of doing. I've donated everything for 3.5 years. My wife thinks I'm just, batshit. I don't know if you can say that on LinkedIn Live or not, but
only if you are.
Thank you.
It's kind of hard to take it back now.
Unless they do, is there any way to edit? I guess not. But anyways, it is a true statement. So, anyways, if there's anyone out there that wants to help us sponsor, that would be great. So, anyways, on that note, I have a more of a sort of a personal interest question, and we'll just go around starting with you, Charlie. You have two choices of a question. Who's your favorite superhero, or my sort of North Star when I pivoted from victim to advocate was a quote from Albert Einstein when a reporter asked him. He said, "Mr. Einstein, on one hand you have science and physics and mathematics and all that, and on the other hand you have the possible existence of a higher authority or God. How do you kind of reconcile those two worldviews?" And he famously said, "Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous." So, Charlie, you can say who is your favorite superhero, or you can talk about some Einstein moment.
Well, besides you mean second to you, superhero. I guess God is my North Star, so it makes it pretty simple.
Indeed, and how about you, Ron? Who's your favorite superhero?
My favorite superhero, actually, it's always since I've been a little kid, Superman has always been my favorite superhero, and nothing has really shaken that foundation since I've been like 4.
It's interesting. I learned recently that his logo, the S, is not actually for Superman. It stands for it's a character from his planet.
Yeah, I believe it. They actually in the latest movie, they actually talked about that where it's not an S. It actually stands for, I can't remember if it stands for justice. I believe it does. So it's actually the symbol for the House of L.
Well, we have an actual comic expert. Alex is like a real comic fan. Tell the audience about your comics and all that cool stuff.
Yeah, no, I can tell you the name of my favorite graphic artist. I have over 15,000 comics in my collection. I started collecting, my short funny story. My brother and I would not spend our lunch money and then go buy comics at the end of the month. We had a whole box and everything at Edge Cards and Comics down the street from our house in Colorado Springs. But we are on free and reduced lunch, so we each got $2 a week. But $4 could buy you after a month that bought you good comics. You had to select them, so very selective about my comics. My favorite comic book character is Batman. I know not to go party line, but essentially he didn't have any special superpowers. He created everything he needed from tools that he could create, and he beat down Batman, Ron, or he beat down Superman, Ron. Yeah. So he was able to create a suit that could beat down Superman.
Yeah, but they asked what the superpower was in one of the movies, right? And they said, what's your superpower? I'm rich.
Yeah,
which is true, right?
Your favorite graphic artist?
Jim Lee.
Jim Lee. Yeah.
Jim Lee or Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane got very comic-y toward the end of Spawn, but Jim Lee during the X-Men series, amazing.
Well, I have to opine on that real quickly because I'm actually in discussions, and this is almost breaking news, but we're not quite ready, with the Auto ISAC to do a custom comic called Defending Your Wheels, all about automotive cybersecurity and, autonomous vehicles and, all that stuff. We were having discussions with Marvel Comics, so don't worry if that comes through. I'll still be a man of the people, no problem. I'll return your calls or whatever. Matt, you must know something about superheroes because of your question, like who's your favorite comic artist?
My favorite superhero is Deadpool, hands down.
Yeah, why?
I never read any of the Deadpool comics, but the movies are just hysterical. Ryan Reynolds is one of my favorite actors, and I love those movies. If I had to pick a graphic artist to be my favorite, I would actually go with Alan Moore. Love Watchmen.
Wow.
Yeah, me
That's
too.
Cool. Well, Keith, you're going to have the final word.
Yeah. All right. So it used to always be Superman for me. I always wanted to fly. Then when I hurt my back, I thought about Wolverine and having that ability to heal. And also not being held to a moral compass allows you to be a little bit better at your craft. But that's probably not a good answer. So if I had to get one, I have a real life one, and then you mentioned them in your comic book. I suffered a lot of bullying when I was in junior high, and it was tough. I mean, if I look back at what I was going through, it wasn't fun. And I had a family member, it was my mom's cousin, George Mandis. He retired colonel, but he was at the time a lieutenant colonel, or when I saw him, maybe a major in the United States Marine Corps. And I'll tell you, he was my hero. He taught me how to defend myself. And then I was fortunate by God to grow to over 6'5". But through his teachings in my 8th grade summer, I changed my whole life. So he's my real world superhero.
That's awesome.
Well, and there's a backstory to that, which is when Keith told me in a lot more detail about that, it was incredibly emotional, and I felt very privileged to listen and learn. So we included his story in one of our comics, a real life story. So all the characters in our comics are real people with real stories. So, if you in our audience, want to be memorialized, connect with me on LinkedIn, send a message. If you want to be a guest, on our show, that'd be cool. Send a message as well. I'll end the way we began by saying thank you to all of you who are, these real life unsung cyber heroes, for keeping us safe and for sharing your wisdom with us. Again, we'll find a way to get you contact information of everybody, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.